I want to officially welcome all of you to session one of the movement that we're calling Sheep for Brains. More on that name in just a moment, but let me introduce myself if we haven't met. My name is Dave Rosendahl from Mindfire, and with me today are Chris Minn from Infigo, John Bailey from Precision Proco, and Jessica DeCola from GPA. We also have a very special guest with us today, Glenn Packiam, who I am going to introduce to you momentarily. For those of you who are here for the first time, what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of give you a little insight into the background of this movement and how it came to be. And in order to do that, we've got a very, very short video here that we're going to play. You're going to hear the audio that kind of summarizes why we are doing what we're doing. It's a short 3-minute recap. You're going to hear from me. You're going to hear from John, Chris, and Jessica. And I want you to listen carefully because we're sharing not only why this movement is important to the four of us, but also why it's important to you and your part in this. Now, as we go through this, some of you asked me about this as you were registering for the event. This is not a D-Scoop initiative. This is not some covert sales pitch to get you to buy HP equipment, although, of course, those are all good things. But this is something that's much more than that, much larger than that. And so what I'm going to do to bring everybody on the same page, for those of you who are the first timers, and even if you were there in the last session, just to reorient you to what it is that we're doing here, I'm going to go ahead and play this now.
This will now be called officially Sheep for Brains. New name and a new movement. Why are we putting this out there? Why do we need a name? Because we want to be able to push this onto social media. We want to get cut through. We want to get people interested, and we want people to see exactly what we're all about. It's about challenging our brains to think about it differently. We want to be seen and heard. So I hope you like it.
This mental health, wellness, and sustainability initiative that has started over the past couple of months and really picked up a lot of steam. But I need to warn everybody up front, all of you who are here in the room today, this isn't just another webinar. This is a heartfelt, deeply personal mission that the folks that are here talking today with you have to support one another in this industry.
And one of the biggest things that was highlighted when we touched on human sustainability was actually the severe lack of support in our industry. And the tipping point for this for me personally was being at the D-Scoop event and hearing a lot of honest conversations of some very key individuals that run businesses who are going through tough times, sharing anxiety, stress, depression. And having been a business owner myself, I felt many of those feelings at many different times. And I just felt this sort of overwhelming need to put some kind of support network in place because we need those business owners. We need them to be strong. We need them to feel supported by the community, because without those guys and girls, we don't have a community.
Media that you can see here outside, which we're all going to do, and we're going to be providing that to other members. So you guys being on this call is so important because we want everybody to move with it. This is not about us four. The more input from everybody else, the more we're going to share it, the more we'll post it socially, the more we'll get it out. We're going to get a movement going where Sheep for Brains actually means stuff to people outside of just the D-Scoop community. So we're going to be posting content in various pillars. We're going to have the press engagement and press releases, and we want you guys to all have a say in it. This is not just about us. Hands up, lean in, have a say, and that's why it needs branding.
So we've been working very closely with Peter and the D-Scoop leadership team. And so guys, when we're all together in Long Beach next year at D-Scoop, we are going to have an early speaker session. We're going to have a morning show time slot in Long Beach. The four of us in collaboration with D-Scoop are going to have a kind of wellness oasis. And again, leveraging this platform, having webinars, podcasts. Our friend Chris here has like 17,000 podcasts a week, and so does Dave. So all of those things, guys, forthcoming from now until Long Beach. So keep an eye out on all of the social media platforms, but especially this community page where we're really hoping to kind of push out and build a content and community and really raise this up.
The reason why we're doing this nights, weekends, and in our spare time, which as all of you know is very little, right? But the reason that we're doing this is the thought, the idea that there might be one person. If we can just help one person, maybe that's you, maybe that's somebody in your family or somebody in your company. If we can just help one person, all of this is worth it.
Yeah, Dave, I think the teaser's great and it gives everyone a bit of an intro into why we're doing it. But there was so much on that introductory session that we held that we couldn't share. There was an amazing amount of openness and transparency from the attendees who joined us on that event, some of who are with us today, which is fantastic. All four of us, obviously yourself included, can all vouch for the validation that we had from the comments during the event and then the emails we received post the event. It just proved the point that we hit a nerve, and once we had put it out there and said we're doing this, people came forward in droves and said, yeah, we need this, I need help. And,
right.
And it, like I say, it just validated that we're doing something that is required and is needed.
Yeah, so just to really go into that, I really want to get going on this topic for today with Glenn. I think one thing we have to do, and just to cover off the ground, is that something that's really important to us is how we create a safe space for people, because everybody on this call needs to understand that, and people who are on the last call will know, yes, we'll have fun and we're making, we're having a joke and we're addressing the situation, but at the end of the day, this is really important to people and really serious. So we really feel it's important for us to create a safe space for this group. So we do think we need to have some ground rules, but we think each of these sessions need to have some ground rules of how we define we want to be with each other. So I think that's really important. So we are going to keep doing this piece about our code of conduct and how we believe we need to work together to make sure this is a safe space for everybody and everybody feels like they can really open up. So if we can go to the next slide, and perhaps Jess, you could just go through the serious bit for us, because you're the serious one.
Mom in the room, right? So yeah, I mean, I echo what John and Chris said, and Dave too. That first meeting, for those of you that attended, was exactly what we hoped it would be. It was authentic, it was vulnerable. We saw a need for people to have a space like this, a safe space to come and to talk and to open up, and to understand that there are resources and there are people out there that can walk alongside of them in this journey. But with that, guys, is this safe space that we need to create. And I think one of the most important things on this code of conduct list, and we're going to put this up in every single session, is that respect. We have to respect each other's confidentiality. We need to resist any judgment. And if you can't do that, then this is not the space for you. Not to be like blunt or bold or, mean, but this is a place for support. But this is also not a place for us to promote our businesses. We all come from 4 different businesses in the industry. We're not here to promote our businesses. We're here to promote people and ourselves, just being mindful of each other in this space. So this is the official code of conduct. And Dave, I'm going to hand it back to you, because today we've got Glenn here.
Yep.
We've had the good fortune of spending some time with him in advance. But Dave, why resilience? Why are we here today?
Yeah. Let me talk about that here for a moment. I'm going to share through my own life in terms of why it's important. But I think, Jess, to put a cap on what you just said, folks, go over to the chat right now. Open up the chat. Everybody should have the Zoom chat in, and drop a yes in the chat if you can live by the code of conduct here. We want this to be an all play. Everybody's in. Go over to the chat, drop a yes. I want to see those yeses coming in from Allegra, Devin, Danielle, David, Courtney, Jeff, Matt. Hey, Matt Custer, I see you there. All of you, come on. Yes, says Chris, of course. Yes. Okay, keep the yeses coming in. This is super important, because we are here to serve you and to help you. And in order to do that, Glenn, I think you used the word yesterday. This needs to be not only a safe space, but it's also a sacred time for us to be able to engage in these conversations. So going back to the question that you just asked me, Jess, in terms of why resilience, there was a mentor that I had a number of years back who said something to me that I've thought a lot about over the years. And he said to me, Dave, there are no such things as business problems. There are personal problems that show up in business. So no such thing as a business problem, but there are personal problems that show up in business. And so when I think about a statement like that, Jess, yeah, it's clever, it's kind of pithy, right? But if I'm honest, what it makes me think about are the personal problems that I'm experiencing or that I bring into my work, and how they impact what I'm doing with my team and with customers and with the industry. But the inverse is also true, right? The stuff that I have at work is also impacting me at home. So if I'm really honest, Jess, the reason why this is important is, for me, I call this a 6-inch problem. It's a problem that exists between my 2 ears. It happens in my head. These things are in my head. And I'm sure that's true for many of you. And as I reflect on that, one of the things that I have felt over the last few years especially is this kind of bone deep exhaustion and like a heaviness to my spirit, just a tiredness that doesn't go away with a good night's sleep. I think many of you can probably relate to that. And if I'm perfectly honest, it leaves me feeling tired. It leaves me feeling drained, leaves me feeling hollow. Anybody else resonate with that? Let me know there in the chat. This is a place where we can share. I want to know if that resonates with you. I suspect for me that some of this has to do with the crushing pressure of the pandemic period. In many ways, we're still kind of dealing with the impact of that. I'm dealing with the impact of that stress. But, friends, if I'm perfectly honest with you, I've hidden that. I haven't wanted to admit it. I haven't wanted to admit that I feel this way. I don't want to say that I'm tired because to me, it feels like I'm admitting defeat. Now, you don't have to worry. I'm in therapy for all of this, so I am working on this, but I know that I'm not alone. That's why I share this. And so, Jess, to answer your question, we are hearing from you, the community, that many of you are experiencing very high levels of stress and burnout, and you feel drained. And that's why we need to talk about how do you build resilience, not only in ourselves as business people, as leaders, but also in our staff and in our families. And folks, for those of you who are here from the industry, let's face it, there's no shortage of challenges coming our way in print, in direct mail. We're in a challenged time. And so we need to build resilience in multiple ways, which brings me to introduce my friend Glenn Packiam today. Building resilience is a topic that he is an expert on. And Jess, John, Chris, and I all feel that he's uniquely positioned to bring insights to us as entrepreneurs, business owners, leaders, to help us figure out how do we prioritize our own mental health and wellness, and how do we build the sustainability of our people, of ourselves. And so a little bit about Glenn, and then I'm going to bring him on, and he's going to share with us some thoughts here. He is a senior fellow with the Barna Group and lead pastor of a multi-million-dollar faith-based nonprofit in Orange County. He is an expert at cultivating resilience and helping leaders thrive in this rapidly changing world. You can see many of his credentials here on the screen. And as a researcher, he's used his studies to coach hundreds of leaders like us on navigating the challenges that I'm sure many of you will resonate with. He draws on his insights from that research to help us understand, how do we build resilience? How do we cultivate a deeper life while facing the reality of the stress that we all face running our businesses and doing the things that we need to do at work? He's also the author of 2 bestsellers, one called The Resilient Pastor and the other called The Intentional Year. And so we feel, Jess, John, Chris, and I, that his voice here in the conversation is going to help us, help all of you explore this in a way that's going to give you not only insights, but also actionable strategies. So without further ado, Glenn, welcome to our gathering, and thank you for being with us here this morning.
You guys, thank you so much for that, Dave. And thank you, Jess and John and Chris. And to everybody joining in, I mean, I feel very privileged to be welcomed into this space. And I really do feel, I said to the team yesterday, I really do feel this is a kind of sacred space. And in this sense, anytime human beings get together and slow down and allow ourselves to be attentive to one another, I think there's something beautiful about that. So I'm grateful to this. And I just want to commend all of you to take an hour out of your workday to focus on your most valuable resource, which is yourself, is an amazing thing. We products we can make more of, money, hopefully we can make more of, but you only have one you. There's a poet, Mary Oliver, who said, what are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? Tell me what you're going to do with it. And I think that's why we're here today. We're taking seriously our one wild and precious life, and to figure out how we could cultivate flourishing in that place. So I'm gonna share today 3 keys to cultivating resilience, and I'm gonna talk to you from things that I've learned through some research, through some experience out in the field coaching leaders in the nonprofit space, but also through my own journey. I've been leading and working in the nonprofit space for 25 years. But before we get into that, there's a story I want to open with. It's a story of a rabbi going to see a doctor. Now, I know it sounds like the beginning of a joke, but the British friends on the call will appreciate this. This is a story of Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. He has, since passed away, but Rabbi Jonathan Sacks was the chief rabbi of the British Commonwealth. So Jewish communities all around the British Commonwealth looked to him for kind of guidance. And he tells this story in one of his books. He was going in for his first kind of physical. And if you've had this experience, you know what's coming, but he didn't know what was coming. So the doctor gets him in on the treadmill, puts all these sensors on him, and he says, okay, start running, and he's like, what are you testing? How fast I can run, and the doctor was like, just be quiet, keep running, and so he goes, are you testing how far I can run, how many miles I can log? And he goes, no, just keep running. And so finally he's done off the treadmill and he's huffing and puffing and he catches his breath. And the doctor pulls off all the sensors and he goes, doctor, what in the world? Like, what was this about? And he goes, I was testing how quickly your heart returns to its resting rate. And when Rabbi Sacks talked about this, what he said, it occurred to me that one of the markers of health is rates of recovery. In other words, health is not just that you never experience turbulence or that you never experience duress. That's an unrealistic expectation. And so maybe you're joining the webinar today and you're already like kind of feeling a little bit of shame or a little bit of like, oh man, am I the only one? Feeling kind of mentally distressed, or I'm anxious, I'm discouraged, maybe even some levels of depression. And maybe there's shame for you of saying, certainly that means I'm not strong enough. And I open with this insight to say health doesn't mean that you never experience distress. Health doesn't mean that you never get disrupted or dysregulated. Health is about, one of the markers of health is about rates of recovery.
I'm going to read, Danielle, what you're saying here. For me, it's about redefining what work ethic really means to us individually. I've been in the print industry since age 16, and it's time to give ourselves grace and time to care for ourselves, mind, body, and spirit, which can be challenging. Absolutely. The mindset is not working for me anymore. I hear you there. Finding boundaries is important to me and what I want for my loved ones and those I care about. Thank you for developing a safe space. You got it, Danielle. Thank you for sharing and being honest with us there. Let's see. How are we doing? Yeah, Glenn, I think you got it now, right?
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Thumbs up. Thank you, Danielle, for sharing that. And others, as we go through this and as Glenn shares, please drop your thoughts and your comments there in the chat. We want this to be a two-way conversation. Glenn, back over to you.
So resilience is about recovery, and that's the first thing we want to say is there's no shame in feeling what you feel, but what we're going to talk about is how we can recover. The second thing I want to say is maybe you're kind of thinking, well, how does this, cross relate between our worlds and our fields? And I was talking with the team yesterday, listening to everyone share their story about why this is so important to them. And it occurred to me, our fields are different and our different industries are, they have their differences. And yet there is this common human dynamic here about us. So let me give you a profile of, let's just call him Tom. Tom has a hard time sleeping at night because there's multiple trains on multiple tracks, on multiple schedules in his mind. And then on top of all that, moving trains, moving tracks, he has multiple roles and expectations of himself. Sometimes he's meant to be a fundraiser, raising capital and revenue. Sometimes he's meant to be a visionary leader. Sometimes he's meant to be a leadership coach. Sometimes people expect him to be a personal counselor or a social activist. Sometimes he's supposed to be a voice of wisdom and insight. Sometimes he's like a warehouse worker. And this is a sense of stacking vocational expectations in today's work environments, one of the changes in our world. And the reason for the stress is the stacking expectations and the multiple projects. When you think about this, you go, well, what line of work is Tom in? I wrote this profile thinking about myself. This reflects as someone who maybe serves as a pastor or in a nonprofit space. I began researching hope in 2013 for my doctoral work and learned about the different rituals that help people cultivate hope. And then in 2020, I began the research on resilience, not even knowing the pandemic. This is before the pandemic had begun. And one of the areas of focus was on faith leaders. And I just want to show you a slide because when you think about the stacking expectations of entrepreneurs, of CEOs, there are some parallels. And one of the things that I discovered in the research is in 2021, this is the number of pastors whose impulse to quit had risen. And we sometimes think, well, surely if anybody's never going to be discouraged, surely it's people who are in touch with the transcendent, people who are doing meaningful work, good work. You would think, surely these people don't experience what I experience out in the real world. But here you look at these rising rates, 38%. It peaks in March of 2022, 42%. It starts to come back down. Now, here's what I want you to pay attention to. This is not about people who actually quit. The crisis is not a resignation crisis. This is a discouragement crisis. And in some ways, I think that's even more serious because it's one thing to say, hey, this isn't working. I'm quitting my field. I'm moving on. When Dave and I have had chats, one of the conversations we had was, are you done or are you tired? And for a lot of us, we're not done, but we don't know how to go on. And I think that's this field of leaders in particular is one example of that. 45% of founders thought their mental health was bad or very bad at the current moment. 85% said they've experienced high stress in the past year. The other 15% are lying, right? 75% said they'd had anxiety in the same period. 61% said they'd considered leaving their company. 49% said they're considering leaving like now, like in the coming year. So not only is there discouragement, but there is this sense of saying, I don't know how I can see the way forward. So resilience is not only about recovery, it must also be about recalibration. In Nicholas Taleb's work on anti-fragility, he talks about how there's an idea of getting stronger through hardship. You guys, you're all here today, which means you've made it through some very rough, once in a generation kinds of experiences. And what we're hoping to find is, okay, so in what ways did we grow stronger through that hardship? How can we retool? How can we refine? How can we become more ready for challenges ahead? So now on to these 3 keys that I want to share with you today. My premise for sharing these 3 keys with you is that cultivating resilience actually requires activating your agency. Psychologists talk about this fancy term of internal locus of control or external locus of control. Internal locus of control means your sense of how the world is going to go depends on you and your choices. External locus of control is it's all about the environment, it's about situations, about the economy. Now, both extremes can be bad. If you go all internal locus of control, you will live with tremendous stress and you'll think it's all up to me to fix everything. But if you go all external locus of control, you'll be powerless and feel passive because now all of a sudden you're like, well, I can't control this. I can't control this, my industry, the economy, the clients, the accounts that I have, all of that. But what we're looking for here is to slide the dial a little bit over to the internal locus of control part and to say, okay, when I feel overwhelmed, when I feel anxious, when I feel discouraged, it's because of everything I'm seeing out there. What do I have within my own power to act on? Where can I actually begin to make some changes? And so our goal today is don't focus on the things you can't control or change, but instead act in the spaces where you have agency. So there's a lot we know we can't control. There's a lot we know we can't change, but how can we act in the spaces where we have agency? So these are 3 places, 3 areas where you have agency, and I want to empower you with it. So here we go. The first is personal limits. This might seem like an odd place to start because maybe we're like ready for like, give me the tips to kind of run through the wall, you know, and I want to get stronger. But it's counterintuitive that actually the place to begin is being honest with our limits. I think regardless of how you understand the makeup of the human being, there's a need here to listen to what our bodies are telling us, what our emotions are telling us, and as a way of tapping into the condition of our own soul. One of the questions I've used with our own team and with teams that I've worked with is to help them reflect on this differentiation. Are you weary or are you wounded? Some years ago, I worked for an organization where the founder had a pretty public scandal, and it resulted in him being removed from his office. And then a year later, a new leader came in. 3 months into the new leader, there was a shooting that took place on the campus of this organization. And tragically, 2 teenagers were killed that day. A couple others were injured. And I was still on staff at that organization. So think about this, within a 13-month span of time, you have a major scandal with the founder, and then you have a major tragedy where 2 people lost their lives, a couple of others were wounded. The whole staff was provided with counseling, paid for counseling, extensive counseling through counselors in our city. This is when I lived in Colorado. And the counselors reported back to the board. The board wanted to know, just give us high-level feedback. Tell me how the team's doing. You obviously don't violate confidentiality. And these counselors said, it's so interesting. The team started by talking about the shooting, but really their actual wound was from the scandal. And the scandal was 13 months prior. I think this is how, PTSD works. Dave, we've come through the pandemic, but I don't know if I've fully recovered from that. Honestly, the way PTSD works, and I lived in a city where Colorado Springs had the highest number of military installations, I think, of any other city in America in terms of Army bases, Air Force bases. And so we'd interact with people who were coming back from deployments. And one of the things you realize is the trauma triggers don't hit you until life gets back to normal. So when you're in the situations of high stress, your body has coping mechanisms. Your body has a way of fueling you, flooding you with enough adrenaline to kind of work through the high stress situations to do what it requires. It's when you get out of those high stress situations, it's when things start working again. It's when things start going well that all of a sudden you get jumpy. You think of friends that I knew that would come back from deployment, Afghanistan or in the Middle East somewhere, and they'd be in a line at Walmart or they'd be in traffic on the freeway. And then all of a sudden something would edge them. And so these 2 questions, are you weary or are you wounded, is so important. Because if you're wounded, no amount of vacations will help you. If you're wounded, no amount of work-life balance will help you. You need deeper help. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. But at the same time, if there's not a wounding and you go, you know what, there's not some deep underlying thing, it's really just that I'm just tired and I need a break, then that could help. Part of personal limits is also paying attention to the season that you're in. Good work done in the wrong season is bad work. My father-in-law retired from 50 years of farming in the Midwest. He had beef cattle, corn, alfalfa, all this stuff. And he was like an old school farmer. He loved the dirt. He loved the crops. He loved walking the fields. He would teach me over the years, like, listen, this is when you chop firewood and this is when you plant. And you could do good work, but if it doesn't fit the season that you're in, it's bad work. One of the most important jobs we have as leaders is to pay attention. What season is our company in? Are we in a winter season where we really need to do work that's subterranean on our infrastructure, on our health, on our rhythms? Or are we in a spring season where things are blooming and we need to pay attention to the season that you're in, but also personally? Heard a story of a well-known counselor who was he just had gotten word that his wife was diagnosed with cancer. And he tells the story of showing up to the grocery store with a list, but he was so overcome by the shock and the grief of his wife being diagnosed with cancer that he says he just stood there in the parking lot in front of the grocery store, unsure of what to do. And this worker at the grocery store approached him and said, "Sir, can I help you?" And without even thinking, the first words out of this counselor's mouth were, "My wife has cancer." And it's amazing that need for human vulnerability and human connection. He just blurts out to a total stranger, "My wife has cancer." And the grocery store worker goes, I'm so sorry. Can I help you? Do you have a list? And he goes, I don't think I have a list. And he goes, well, check your pockets. He checks his, oh, I do have a list. And the grocery store worker walked with him through the store to help him get all of his items and get his shopping done that day. It's an incredibly moving story of personal kindness, but it's also a story of how seasons impact us. Dave, your comment about there are no business problems, there are personal problems that affect our business. If you're going through a personal season of a health challenge or a health challenge of someone in your family, maybe it's even sort of a good thing, but it's a new season. You've just added a kid or had a kid, just gotten in a relationship, gotten out of a relationship. Those are all seasons that can lower your ability to be the same old you. And so I think the thing that you need to do in those moments, in those seasons, is be honest about your personal limitations and to say, you know what? I'm going to be kind to myself in this moment. I can't do what I did in this other season. I'm going to have to change the way I'm working. The second place to have agency, so we had personal limits. The second one is Keystone habits. Charles Duhigg, the business writer, talks about the power of habit and particularly the power of Keystone habits, certain habits that kind of push other things into place or put other things into place. I think you can take an inventory of your habits in 3 spheres of your life. Now, this is the work, the book, The Intentional Year, that my wife and I wrote, is about a retreat that we've done for almost 15 years now. We do this retreat once a year. It's a retreat to kind of reflect back intentionally and then begin to take an inventory of all of our habits and set them as rhythms in our calendar for the next 6 months. And the reason this is so important, I think of that John Lennon song, Beautiful Boy, where he says, life is what happens while you're busy making other plans. This is a way of saying, what are my keystone habits? How can I intentionally live these next 6 months? God willing, you're going to live these next 6 months anyway. Another way of saying it is you're going to arrive at some destination. Just decide which destination you actually want to arrive at. You're going to be somewhere 6 months from now. You might as well decide where you want to arrive and how you're going to get there. So these 3 spheres that I'm going to leave you with to kind of do some thinking about is rest, renewal, and work. And so let me just briefly kind of rapid fire go through rest, and then we'll get to the third place of agency, and then leave some time for questions. The Jewish people have a practice of a weekly Sabbath. I think there's such an inspiration we can take from that. The idea of stopping. So when I say rest, Dave and I, we live in Orange County. We don't mean like kick your feet up by the beach, although if you can, more power to you. But the idea of rest is simply, what will you stop doing? So, my wife and I, we've been married 23 years. We have 4 kids. we've gone through seasons where the weekends were like running to dance rehearsals and recitals and club soccer and tournaments and all that stuff. Rest was not kicking my feet up, but rest was, I'm not going to check work email, or I'm not going to work on this content that I know is due. I'm going to save that for another day. So when I say a rhythm of rest, it's simply, how can you create space where you'll stop doing the things that are costly for just a few hours, ideally 12 hours, ideally 24 hours. What activities that drain you or that are costly to you can you stop doing, at least in one spot every week? Today's digital work, it's so easy to always respond to a text or a DM or a Slack message or whatever. But can we carve out, you know what? The world is going to go on without me for these 6 hours or 12 hours or 24 hours. The next place to take an inventory in is renewal. If rest is about not draining the battery, renewal is about recharging the battery. So, your smartphone, close all the apps that makes you not drain the battery anymore, but doesn't renew the battery. You got to plug it in to charge the phone. So renewal, I had a counselor ask me in one of my sessions with this counselor, he said, what do you do for play? And I was like, what am I, like a 12-year-old boy? Like, I don't have play. What are you talking? Why are you asking me this? And he said, no. Like, what do you do that makes you smile, that brings you joy? And I realized that I'd gotten so serious in life. I got so serious about doing work that, again, meaningful work, nonprofit sector. It's easy to justify, but all of us have reasons to justify it. You're putting bread on the table for your employees. You're providing products and services that make the world a better place. It's serious business, right? What do you mean play? And I had to kind of take time to kind of say, well, maybe it's a walk, maybe it's a bike ride, maybe it's a gratitude journal. And there's a tremendous amount of research about this. If you've come across Arthur Brooks, he taught a course at Harvard for many years on happiness and did a lot of research at Harvard about happiness. And one of the key practices to improve happiness, or he calls it happierness. You can't chase happiness. It's too elusive, but you can get happier tomorrow than you were today and happier the day. And he's like, one of the key practices of that is a gratitude list, is to just take time for that. So maybe renewal is not play. Maybe renewal for you is becoming aware and writing down things that you're thankful for. I'm thankful for my house. I'm thankful for my job. I'm thankful for the weather, and you go on. But believe it or not, that's a way of bringing renewal. And then the third place is work. It's helpful maybe to think about your teams, especially younger people who are entering the workforce for the first time. We have a lot of Gen Z on our team, and a lot of them have never thought through what aspects of your work are most energizing, most draining, and most neutral, so that you can organize your time to match your energy. That's a hack that all of you know, but a lot of people entering the workforce don't know. How do I match my best energy with my most important task? Organize my time that way so that my best work gets my best energy, or my most important work gets my best energy. And of course, there's work that someone else can do for you. The goal with those habits, so Keystone habits is what we're talking about. The goal is not to treat these like New Year's resolutions. I think the next level up from resolutions is rhythms. And a rhythm is better than a resolution, because a rhythm, you already know how often, when, where, and what. For me, I just put it in my calendar. I'm like, this is my meditation time. This is my workout time. This is my, and it's just in my calendar, so that I never have to start a day and be like, what am I doing? When am I doing this? It's just built in. It's habitual. It's a simple, achievable, repeatable rhythms. If you're doing this for the first time, just a little pro tip. I mentioned 3 spheres. It could be overwhelming to you. You're like, how can I come up? My recommendation is just to choose 1 or 2 in total. So you may not even get 1 for each of those spheres that I mentioned, but just choose 1 or 2 that will help you. Okay, so we've covered personal limits, Keystone habits. The third place of agency in cultivating resilience is about relational orbits, the people in your life. I've learned a lot over the years from watching people who have navigated life well. And one of the key insights of a mentor of mine passed on to me like 15 years ago. I'm in my mid-40s. That's not so. 15 years ago, a mentor of mine passed on to me. He said, instead of looking for one North Star, look for a constellation.
Huh.
This was a game-changing insight, because so many times, especially as we get older in life, we either look for the one best friend or the one perfect mentor or the one ideal counselor or even the one ideal mate or partner, and even, I'm in a long-term marriage here, 23 years. My spouse, my wife, is not the be all end all of all the relationships I need in my life, right? And that's the way we all need different kinds of relationships. We need a constellation of voices to guide us. And so I'm going to have a little fun with this, and hopefully it helps you remember it. There's a constellation of relationships that you could think of it this way. Look at the left column: sage, king, peers, companions, healer. In the Lord of the Rings, it's Gandalf, Aragorn, elves and dwarves, Sam, Merry, Pippin, and then the healers are Arwen and Elrond. Here's the description, okay? This is the most important thing. A sage is someone who's seasoned and more experienced, someone who has been where you want to go. This could be a mentor, could be a coach. A king is someone who can tell you no and can tell you the truth. So this could be a partner. It could be your board. It could be, someone in your life who could say, that's not a good idea. You shouldn't do that, and tell you the truth about it. A peer is people who are in the same role but different context. I think this call is an example of peers. You're in different businesses, you have different companies, but you have the same role, more or less, but different contexts for it. A companion is people who have a different role, but are typically in the same context. So for me, a companion is someone who lives right here, but they're not in the same line of work. They're not in my exact role of leadership or whatever, but we're in the same geographical life context. We do life together. We're walking with you. Again, Lord of the Rings, it's that moment where Sam says to Frodo, "Can't carry the ring, but I can carry you." That's the idea. We need people who say, "I don't know the burden that you're carrying in your business, and I can't carry that for you, but I'm going to carry you as you go through it." A healer is a trained professional who can drain the poison and dress the wound. We've talked a lot about therapy in here. On our call yesterday, we went around and talked about, actually, counselors come in all shapes and sizes. But it's a person who can professionally, who's been trained to pay attention and help you drain the poison and dress the wound. The contribution that each brings: a sage brings wisdom, a king or queen brings authority, a peer brings solidarity, a companion brings companionship, and a healer brings healing. So who is in your relational orbit? This is another framework for you to take and reflect on. Beyond this webinar, there's obviously no time to do this right now, but hopefully this slide deck will give you a couple frameworks. And so just like the habits one was take an inventory of those 3 spheres, this relational one, start to use that framework of sage, king, peer, and go, who's missing in my constellation? I'll be honest, the one that's most frequently missing in mine is companions. I have a lot of peers. I have some sages. I have but companions, especially, I'm 2 years into a new city. We moved to California 2 years ago. I'm working on that. What relationship do you want to lean? Which relationship for you do you want to lean into? Which relationships do you need to kind of let lie and say, what, I don't know where this person's at. And then some relationships, if we're honest, we actually need to let go of and say, this one's just not productive for me. I especially have those conversations with younger leaders who have this idea in their mind that your posse that you ran with, in your early 20s, you'll be BFFs forever. And sometimes they realize, we're on different trajectories in terms of our goals and aspirations, and you got to let go of some of those. That's hard, but necessary work. So think through these. If it helps you to think of relational orbits as concentric circles, who's in your closest orbit? That's frequency and intimacy. And then who's in your farthest out orbit? It's lower frequency and lower intimacy. So in summary, the key to cultivating resilience in your personal life is to be aware of your personal limits, be intentional with your keystone habits, and be purposeful with your relational orbits. Thank you.
Wow. So much there, Glenn. Thank you for sharing that. This is your time to be selfish. I want all of you to go over to the chat. First of all, thank Glenn for those insights, but also ask your questions here. And so while you're doing that, while you're typing in your questions, Glenn, one of the things I want to ask you is when you talk about not having companions, one of the things I struggle with is I always wonder, why do people want to be my companion? I always wonder if there's some ulterior motive, and I'm sure you've experienced that as well. Do you feel that? Give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I resonate with that, Dave. And it's complicated because as a leader in the faith space, I care about people. So if people feel like he is my friend, I think, yeah. But here's a helpful way to think about companionship. The challenge as a leader with finding friends or companions is a lot of our relationships are asymmetrical, meaning there's a power differential. They're asymmetrical and they're non-reciprocal. And what I mean by non-reciprocal is oftentimes as a pastor, I am the person they would call, but they're not necessarily the person I would call if I'm in trouble, you know? And you face this in leaders, in business, it's the same way. You're the person they might go to, but they're not the person. So it is challenging. And because of that, I've had to find people a little bit outside of my immediate realm. So in our context, Dave, there are people within Rock Harbor, but then there are some people beyond it or a little bit outside it that there's a different level of vulnerability and honesty. And I would encourage you, if you're looking for your most vulnerable friends to be people that are working for you, that's probably not really healthy and not going to go really well.
John, I'm going to come over to you. I know that you're likely thinking a million things right now, but if there's one question you would ask Glenn based on what he just shared with us, what would that be?
No, I don't know if I've got a question specifically because I have too much going on in my mind. You know how I work now, right? So I start absorbing everything and start questioning I have lots of questions for myself. I think the point I'm going to make, I'll be interested to see if you're seeing it a lot, is I made a comment on the chat, and it's a genuine comment. I can't talk about COVID without getting emotional. So I genuinely, in a business environment, if I'm at a D-Scoop event or I'm at a set or and someone asks me about COVID, and I start talking about the journey we went through of faced with the staff, sending them home, seeing their face looking at me when I had to send them home, not knowing what was going to happen, is burnt into my psyche. I cannot let it go. And I can't talk about it without genuinely having to take a moment, right? And that's 4 years ago. I think I have got post-traumatic stress disorder on the back of that. And everyone laughs at me because they think I'm joking. And I laugh it off. And I've laughed it off for 4 years. I go, yeah, it must be just getting soft. I'm getting old, you know, I'm getting soft in my old age. But genuinely, when you've said that, that's hit home. And I've realized I actually need to address that, because that's a real thing. And I suppose the question I would ask is, you must be seeing that quite a lot if it's made it to your content of your presentation. You know, like there was a lot in that presentation. You must have seen that a lot.
Absolutely.
Business owners.
Yeah, absolutely. Business owners, the leaders in faith spaces. I mean, I think what made it particularly complicated in the arena that I'm in is people attach some deep life value judgments to the decisions that were made. If you made a decision they disagreed with, they didn't just disagree with your decision, they attacked you for being a Christian or a person who's led by fear or something like that. So all of a sudden you're attaching value judgments now to just tactical decisions. And I think leaders in all kinds of spaces just felt like we were so disoriented. How do we recover from that? And like you said, there were real people who we cared about, who we had to send home, some that were let go, some whose work completely changed. And I think that we should not gloss over that. I don't think we need to say, well, it's over, we're back to normal. There is no going back to normal, not just because industries have changed and work has changed, but we have changed. We are different. We carry scars now. We carry wounds now. And I've had to encourage leaders repeatedly who have dismissed counseling to say, you actually need to engage the services of a therapist where you can talk to about this, because it is very much like the experience of going through trauma. And, you know, mental health, self-harm, temptations, entrepreneurs are particularly prone to this. Actually, entrepreneurs and pastors were the two categories of people that had the highest rates of self-harm. I don't know.
That's incredible. Why is it giving you balloons for that?
I don't know why it's giving me balloons. I'm talking about self-harm and there's balloons. I don't know why it's doing that.
Hi, Glenn. I managed to turn mine off because I kept getting into arguments with people and doing that, and it was saying, well done. I got myself in a chance. No, I mean, look, I listened to what you said, and the point about weary and wounded is the follow-up for that. And, you know, I've just come back from a trip where I'm driving around Sri Lanka in a tuk-tuk, and everyone's going, well, was it an amazing trip? It wasn't until I heard you say, are you weary or are you wounded? And actually, it doesn't matter how wounded you are, whatever you try and do in holiday and try and compensate isn't going to solve the problem. It suddenly became a trip that probably was trying to solve a problem. So I thank you for bringing that to the forefront of my mind. And my key takeaway will be to address that piece. So.
Thanks for your vulnerability, John. Man.
Jessica, I see you there, and I know you're also thinking a bazillion things. What are you thinking?
So many. I have notes in 17 different places, but there were two things that you said, Glenn, that I kind of weaved together. It was stacking expectations in different roles, and then are you done or are you tired? How many different roles do we all play? We're parents, we're friends, we're spouses, we're colleagues, we're leaders, we have leadership to report to. And how do you know when you're done or when you're tired? Because those things collectively make you feel both. How do you know if it's done or tired, and in what segment of your life?
Yeah.
Could you say, I'm just done here, I need to walk away from this, or I'm just tired, but just really not understanding which one of those, because those stacking expectations in different roles are so high.
Yeah, I resonate with that, Jess, and I feel like that's a reality I'm living in. And I think that's why the constellation is so important. So if you think about the metaphor, sailors don't navigate by one star, they navigate by constellations. Well, they used to. I mean, now we have GPS. But in the olden days, you navigate by constellations. And I think I need a constellation to check me on that. So I made a pretty big vocational transition, a change live 2 years ago. But it took me a year to figure that question out. Was I done at my old organization, or was I tired? I mean, we stopped at one organization and started at a new one and moved our family from Colorado to California. It's a huge move, and it takes a constellation of voices to speak into that. And I was looking for, was I looking for all 5 green lights? I was looking for no red lights, on all of those fronts. And I think there's something like that we need a community around us, because we can't see straight sometimes.
No, that constellation analogy was, I mean, brilliant. I think this is Danielle in the chat talking about a tribe that she surrounds herself with in order to move forward. And when you said that, it kind of was like, I think everybody knows that inherently they need more than just one person to lean on, but hearing it in that context, I think was really powerful.
Yeah. Chris, over to you.
Well, I mean, I had some questions. I think you kind of give me a few answers for your content, actually. But sticking with the tribe vibe, I'm very fortunate that I've got some experience with some resilience, and I've got some great peers around me, and some good companions, shall we say. And these three on this panel help me regularly. But I have a really talented team. I work with a lot of talented people, and I'd like to try and get some of that resilience, some of those techniques shared with those guys, so that they can learn and really get the most out of life and learn these lessons that we're sharing today. What sort of techniques do you advise that we use as leaders to share with our teams?
Yeah, I do have a couple in mind, Chris, but let me just say this. I do think our approach to our team is really affected by generational differences. And I don't want to overstate it, but I read there's a sociologist named Jean Twenge, and she wrote iGen back in the day, and her newest book is called Generations. And she takes a chapter at a time for each of the different living generations. But at the end of the book, she takes a few slices of life. And she has a whole chapter on how work has changed from generation to generation, how communication differences. I mean, a humorous one, like in one generation, a personal touch is a face-to-face. The next generation, personal touch is a phone call. Next generation, it's a text. I DM them on Instagram. That's a personal touch. What are you talking about? So there's just differences there. And I think there's differences also when it comes to resilience. Gen Z has a different priority of self-care, and also a different perspective on what is appropriate boundaries of work. And so Gen Z is going to tilt more in the direction of, don't ask me to come in extra hours. Don't ask me to push a project late night. Like, I've got to get to my gym. I've got to get to my session. But again, this is from Jean Twenge's work. Versus, say, a Gen Xer, if you're late 40s and up to 60 or so, you're more likely to need someone to say, call a timeout, man. Take it easy. Like, hey, go on a trip to Sri Lanka, my heritage country, by the way, John, my grandparents. But that's what Gen Xers need. So I think you really have to pay attention to the differences generationally on your team. But I think then there's 2 pieces you could build in. And we do this with the team that I lead. One is to build in that inventory of the 3 spheres. We've actually expanded it for our context. We have 5 spheres that we have them take inventory of. And then we go over it with their supervisors. So supervisors asking them, tell me your habits of rest. Tell me your habits of work. Tell me when are you lining up your best energy with your most important task? Tell me your habits of renewal. And then we add in prayer and relationships in there too. Just tell me your habits of that. And it's a way of a holistic approach to leading a team, because once again, a healthy individual makes for a healthy team, makes for a healthy business, So that's one piece. The second piece that we build in is it's a simple practice, but it's frequent one-on-ones. And actually, generationally, this has become more important. I was talking to a leader of a large organization in Silicon Valley, and he said they used to do annual reviews, and they've switched to quarterly because their 20-something employees wanted more frequent feedback. Like,
Really?
how am I doing? And there's a lot of insecurity in the 20-something workforce, but that insecurity often gets expressed as lack of initiative. And so we mistakenly say, oh, they're lazy, but actually they're just looking for more human connection and a little bit more attaboy, attagirl, like you're doing great, So they switched to these quarterly reviews. This is the guys telling me in Silicon Valley, because they needed more frequent touch points. So I think those two things allow you to instill resilience in your team, in addition to these three things we've talked about, but that you kind of hardwire them, you code them into your best practices.
That's awesome, Glenn. Thank you so much.
Before we lose everyone, Chris and team, I want to ask the audience a few questions. I know, Jess, you have a question. Number one, folks, what I would like to know is, if you would like, we will compile a white paper, not a long one, maybe 1-2 pages, kind of covering everything Glenn just laid out here today. Would that be of value to you? Drop your best email in the chat, and we'll get that composed and get that out to you. So if you would like a white paper covering what Glenn covered today, drop your best email there into the chat. Second, Glenn, I have a question for you. If there's anyone here that would like to speak with you further, perhaps, consider having you speak to their organization or consult them in building in these practices that you've talked about today, how should they go about doing that with you?
I'm going to drop my email for that stuff in the chat here.
What's coming in? I'm loving it.
I'm staring at the chat, and they're flooding in.
Thank you, Glenn, for doing that. So, Glenn, do you want to say anything about how you can help folks?
No, listen, I'm very grateful to be allowed into this space. And if there's something I can do for you, a webinar or a call, that's about the kind of thing I would have bandwidth for. Travel might be a little trickier, but if there's something virtual like this, happy to help, happy to talk. You can drop me an email there.
Jess, I know you have a question for the audience. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, guys, we launched this a little over a month ago, and part of the structure that we kind of talked about was having these speaker sessions and having this pillar theme topic. And this time it was resilience, and I'm still processing everything Glenn just shared with us. I mean, it was magnificent. But one part of the follow-up to this is we talked about creating that safe space, is having some sort of huddle or smaller roundtable discussion. So like, if something here resonated with you guys, you want to continue to have the conversation in a smaller group session and more of a Zoom call where we're all in a meeting space where we can all chat with each other face to face in the chat. Let us know in the chat if this is something you'd be interested in. We're going to kind of gauge the temperature and then schedule something for us to all reconvene, as a smaller group, just to actually chat more about this. So let us know in the chat if this is something you're interested in. Also, as a follow-up, guys, we talked about this being a series. And so this was the first, and God, these are big shoes to fill. So we've got another one coming sometime in November, before the holidays. So keep an eye out from this group here, the Sheet for Brains group. We'll have another speaker again. I don't know, those shoes are really big to fill, but please stay tuned for more information coming about that.
Thank you, Jess. So let us know there in the chat, folks, your responses to Jess. And I know we're past the hour. Thank you all for spending just a few more minutes with us. Did all of you get value today from Glenn? Drop him some X's and O's there in the chat. Let him know that you appreciate him. Did you get value there? It looks like I'm seeing a lot of thank yous regarding the white paper, bring together all the wisdom, the sound bites, guidance, etc. I'm sure we can find a way to put it into print. Awesome. Well, thank you, folks. John, I'm going to go over to you for some final words here, and then I'll turn it over to Glenn to wrap us up.
I'll keep it quick. I love seeing all the messages come in and all the thank yous. That means it worked. We've said all along, if it helps one person, that'll do for me. This is 28 plus us on this call. I think everybody's got value. Couple of key takeaways. Number 2 big takeaway was the COVID piece. So thank you for that, Glenn. That's really genuinely going to make a difference to my life and my work life as of tomorrow. Other big takeaway is frequent one-on-ones. Always shy away from them, think I'm doing too many. I'm going to change them tomorrow morning in my diary to weekly, not monthly, and I'll let you know how that goes. Third point is you're going to regret putting your email on this chat and giving everyone the ability to send you a message, because you're going to be inundated and you're going to be complaining to Dave that you didn't expect that much traffic coming your way. But that's your problem.
Okay.
You volunteered it, not me. And finally, massive thanks, Glenn. Honestly, thanks to everyone who's come to join and listen. Really thank you, Glenn. It's been a fantastic use of an hour of my time, and it's going to really make a difference to my work life and my personal life. So generally, if this is what we've got to look forward to, guys, on our sessions moving forward, hey, man, this is going to be a fantastic session plan, because this is just what a way to start. So Glenn, thank you, mate.
Glenn, I want to give you an opportunity just to say some closing words based on everything you've seen in the chat, based on the feedback and the conversation. What's the takeaway that you want to leave everyone with today?
You're doing a good job. You're here because you care. And I want you to treat yourself with the same level of care as you would to the person that's most important to you in your life, because you only got one you. And I'm grateful for the time today. Thanks for all you're doing. I'm cheering you on.
Wow. Thank you, Glenn. And thank you, everyone who's here. I know that your time is the most valuable asset that you have, so that you would spend, 64 minutes with us today is something that we don't take for granted, and we appreciate all of you. So until next time, thank you for being here today. We're going to send out the recording, and we'll get the white paper out to all of you. And for those of you who are going to be at Printing United in roughly, a week or two? Jess, what is it, a week and a half? Yep.
10 to the 12.
There we go. We'll see you all there. Everyone will be there. Thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Jess. And we'll see everybody. Bye-bye.